Do I look great? Do I look good? Do I look amazing? Hello and welcome back to today's video. So a while ago, I read every single death scene in The Rise of Kyoshi, and I wanted to do that for the Shadow of Kyoshi. But the thing was that this book does not have as many explicit death scenes, but it is still very gruesome. We're going to be reading the scenes that I thought were the most gruesome and just intense scenes ever. And let's get right on into this. Yun beckoned with his fingers, and on one side of the gallery, the fire avatars began to dissolve. The crowns of their heads dripped down the wall, leaving clear wooden backings behind. The brilliant colors of the portraits bled away from their stencils like wax, thrown into a bonfire and pulled into indistinguishable clumps of reddish-brown that floated through the air into Yun's waiting hands. The pigment in the paint, Yun explained. It's usually made of ground-up rocks. No! Dairin screamed, his fears coming to light in a way he could never have imagined. No, no, no! The guards behind him froze, stricken with horror at what they were witnessing. This was an assault on something deeper than their own lives. As if bolstered by his celebration, mighty avatars Zetsu resisted the longest, but he too fell. The paint of his hat running down his long face, merging with the dark colors of his shoulders, then his waist, then his knees. His great stone stamp flaked away into cinnabar dust, joining the growing mass of pigment hovering under Yun's control. One side of the gallery was now completely blank. Instead of the wise faces of their avatars, the portraits of the Fire Lords stared at an empty wall. Yun held the finest work of the Fire Nation in a defiled, roiling blob above his head. And then, like a gleeful child permitted to break a jar, he hurled it on the floor. The pigment exploded in a storm of hardened pellets and sharp fragments and blinding mist. Kyoshi managed to shield her eyes before flying shards embedded themselves in her forearms. A chunk of paint hit her so hard in the midsection that it knocked her on her back and snapped a patch of the links in her chainmail, metal pouring out of her like spilled guts. Her windless gasp did nothing but coat her mouth with red dust. By the time the blurriness in her vision cleared, the vapors from the paint explosion subsided. Yun was gone. The voices around her merged into a whirlpool of indistinguishable noises. Kyoshi crawled her way toward the moans of the wounded on the other side of the room, dragging trails through the dark powder coating the floor. The palace guards had been wearing armor, but mainly ceremonial pieces. She saw lacerated faces, ones like her. Some of them weren't moving at all. Chancellor Dairin had been completely unprotected. She found his body peppered with tiny holes, each one welling with blood. She tried to staunch his wounds with her hands but couldn't cover them all. She had no water to even attempt healing him. More guards poured in from every side. Shouting in confusion, Yun must have already escaped their encirclement. Kyoshi heard more than a few wails of anguish from the hardened fighters at the damage of their culture and history. A deep, queasy sickness rippled through her core. "Where's Hiron?" she said. "Who's with her?" "She's still in the back of our inn. But by herself." Jinpa realized too and swore a curse unbecoming of his people. This whole showdown. A more perfect diversion could not have been designed. After all, why would Yun switch tactics if she kept falling for them? Kyoshi barreled straight for the inn she hadn't slept in yet, knocking men down, trampling them in her haste. Jinpa fell behind, struck to the neck, and knocked to the ground by an errant Samhain elbow. There was no time to wait for him to rise to his feet and shake it off. She had to get to Hiron. The street she was trying to reach lay several blocks away from the square, and as she gained distance from the noise, a ghostly silence fell over her like a cloak. Her own footsteps and ragged breathing were louder than the clash of knuckles on bone she'd been listening to until now. She found the corner where the man from yesterday had nearly caved in his nephew's head and went inside the inn. Inside, the common room was warm, cheery, and well lit. This establishment was deep in the Kyoso side of town, so cushions and throw rugs adorned with the winged pony lay over every surface that would hold them. A paisho board made of weathered wood had been set up in the middle of the floor. On one side sat Hiron, the other, Yun. "Don't move, Kyoshi," Yun said. "She's in grave danger right now." His eyes stayed on the board, examining the game that lay in its middle stages. He'd been forcing Rangi's mother to play. Instead of his Earth Kingdom clothes, Yun wore pilfered Samhain clothes, a stone camellia emblazoned on his shoulder. He'd snuck through the chaos outside by blending in. No bending tricks, just the skills of an infiltrator, his learning made possible by the woman who sat across from him. "Kyoshi, Remember what I told you." Chiron spoke with the same calm determination she had before cutting her hair and letting go of her honor. Now, she was ready to give that little she had left. "Remember what's important. You won't get a better opportunity than this." Yun placed a tile with finality, making the sharp click against the board that signaled the pieces had been carved from high-quality stone. "My victory in 18 moves, Sifu," he said. "No need to continue. It's over." Chiron bobbed her head in agreement. The pie show tiles flew from the board into Yun's hand, following his motions. In an instant, they merged and reformed into a long, thin spike that he pointed at the base of Chiron's neck. Kyoshi screamed and threw her hands up, pushing against the dagger with her earthbending. But Yun maintained his grip on the stone. His bending opposed hers, the same way she and Jiansu had warred against each other in the stone tea house of Quinchao. Only, right here and right now, Yun was stronger than Jiansu. Despite Kyoshi's resistance, the entire way, he sank the dagger into Chiron's throat. Over the sound of the avatar shrieking, Yun and Chiron stared at each other. He held onto the stone spike as if he wanted to maintain a physical connection to her death, the same way he had embraced Jiansu while killing him. He gave her a parting smile. But Chiron wasn't ready to say farewell just yet. Her bronze eyes flared with clarity and purpose. As blood welled from her wound, she grabbed Yun by the wrist. She choked involuntarily, her back spasming and pulling him closer. The dagger plunged deeper into her body. Yun frowned, not expecting this. He tried to pull his hand, but couldn't. Chiron's final muster of strength had turned her into iron. Scarlet trails poured from her lips, but she never took her eyes off her former student. Chiron raised a hand, and with an effort Kyoshi could see was killing her just as much as the blood filling her lungs, she summoned a ball of flame. The blaze in her grasp made her look like the Fire Lord, captured in portrait, unconquered to the end. She thrust her palm into Yun. He managed to break free and tipped to the side right before the fire punched into his torso. His shoulder still got caught in the flame, and he hissed in pain, shoving Chiron to the floor, the motion withdrawing the dagger with a sickening, wet sound. He ran upstairs, leading from the common room to the upper level of the inn, clutching his burned arm. Kyoshi rammed him hard in the stomach with her shoulder. He went rolling over the courtyard, shifting the ground underneath him to halt his skid. As he came to a stop, he pulled up another wall of earth to protect him from the blast of flame Rangi rained down from above as she hovered high in the air, standing on nothing but the counterforce of her own bending. This was their one shot, and they both knew it. It wouldn't last long. Jet stepping without pause was impossible even for a firebender as gifted as Rangi. Kyoshi put her hands together and shot a massive yellow fireball at Yun, hoping its size and overwhelming power would count for something. She still missed. Yun smirked as he dodged out of the way of the rolling sphere. But Rangi acted faster and better than them both. From her higher vantage point, she spun her arms in a circle, mimicking a waterbender, redirecting the flame Kyoshi had put into the world. Kyoshi saw her fireball change course behind Yun like the orbit of a comet and come around for a second pass. Caught off guard again, the barrier Yun raised at the last second wasn't as thick as he needed it to be. It exploded under the weight of the flame. There was a burst of blinding light, smoke, and dust everywhere. The raw power of the Avatar's fire, guided by the refined skill of the Avatar's firebending Sifu. In tandem, maybe they've done it. But when the column of smoke cleared, Yun wasn't there. There was nothing where he stood except for a patch of loose, crumbly earth. "Kyoshi!" Rangi shouted from above. "He can tunnel!" Yun rose up behind her, carried by a rising mound of soil like a waterspout, and drove his hand into the small of Rangi's back. Rangi's lips parted. Her flame sputtered out. Yun let the girl who once defended him with body and mind, spirit and honor, fall to the ground. Kyoshi managed to reach her in time before she dashed against the earth. She caught Rangi in her arms. Her back was wet with blood. Yun had stabbed her with a spike of earth, like the one he'd used against her mother, angling the puncture wound underneath her armor. Kyoshi shut her eyes. She knew if she opened them, light would shine forth, the elements would flow through her, and her bending would rage, unstoppably, until she was left victorious, the last person standing. 1,000 voices told her so. It had been decided long before she was born that the power was adequate compensation for losing what she most held dear. But what was the point anymore? What did the generations have to offer but sorrow and pain? All she knew as she rocked back and forth, cradling the girl she loved in a lullaby of grief, was that if Rangi was taken from her, she would no longer be Kyoshi. She would no longer be human. She would be forever on the other side of the rift, among the swirling colors of the void. She'd glimpsed into the spirit world, watching humans from afar, a terrible and alien presence. Kyoshi. Ranji's voice was the only sound that could make her see right now. Her firebender reached for her face. "Stay here with me," Kyoshi whispered, a faint smile on her lips. She shuddered, and her hand fell before she could touch the avatar one last time. Kyoshi looked up at Yun. The bloody earthen dagger in his hand crumbled to dust. "It shouldn't have been this way," he said. "But this is how it will be. Over and over again, if you keep trying to stop me." She wondered why Karuk nearly let her destroy her surroundings in the spirit world, and why he'd taken her to the site of damage that Yun had caused. Yun had failed his portion of the test. He would rather break the world than his own self-regard. Kyoshi knew what he wanted here, despite what he said before about her being innocent. There was only one thing that would placate him. "I'm sorry," Kyoshi whispered softly under her breath. "I'm sorry I stole your avatar hood." Yun came nearer. "You'll have to speak up. It was yours, and I took it from you." She didn't raise her voice, kept it so he could barely hear her. "I'm sorry I robbed you of everything, Yun. I'm sorry I stole your future." He kneeled down beside her so he could drink in her confession. He needed to hear it from her, but she just needed him close, within arm's reach. I regret everything," Kyoshi said, trembling. "I regret what I did to you so much." "Good." Yun nodded solemnly. "That's good to hear. What else are you sorry for, Kyoshi? Maybe you should apologize for what you said to me earlier, telling me I should just forget what happened. That was a terrible thing for you to say." "I'm sorry for saying you had to live with your pain." Kyoshi put her palm to his chest in a gesture of comfort. "Because you won't." The cold she sent through his body formed a tunnel of ice between his ribs. It happened so fast and with so much force. The moisture in the air behind him turned to frost. His back sprouted vaporous wings of crystal that disappeared just as quickly. With his heart and lungs frozen solid, Yun fell to the side. That was me reading the most gruesome parts of the Shadow of Kyoshi. In my opinion, I think those were the most gruesome parts. And yeah, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I'm thinking about making a review of the two books because I do have different opinions on both of them. But I'm not sure because everybody already knows that I like them a lot. So of course they're going to be pretty highly rated, but yeah, there's that. Make sure you comment what your favorite scene of this book was. Maybe if you haven't read the book yet, maybe what I've read from already. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Bow, 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 bow.